Welcome to another live stream section, ladies and gentlemen. Um, we're about to begin. While the whole world is focusing on what is going on in the Middle East and beyond, there's something going on in the East. People talk about an imminent invasion of Taiwan, whether that is possible or not. But the fact on the ground here is that there's a real possibility of implosion within the state itself. So today we're going to talk about this man. And who is this man? This is General Zhang Youxia. So the conversation today will be about this general that have become, the center stage of international attention. Towards the end of last year, we knew something was happening in China. I talked about it extensively for those of you that have been coming on my channel. So as we speak, China is facing one of the most serious internal power shifts in decades. And it's happening largely behind closed doors. In recent months, senior military leaders have disappeared from the public view. Top generals, once seen as untouchable, are now under investigation. And the People's Liberation Army, the backbone of the Chinese power, is experiencing what we call a leadership vacuum that has stunned analysts around the world. So while everybody is trying to understand what is going on in Africa, Trump deployment in Nigeria, the conflict or potential conflict between the US and Iran, something is quietly going on behind the scene. In China, China is the second most important country on earth. So we must not take it lightly. China is one of the most important countries on earth. Economically, you can argue that China is the most important country in the world, without a doubt. So let's have this conversation today about what is really going on behind the scene. So there were reports that emerged towards the end of last year that General Zhang Youxia and some other generals, that are the most senior military guys in China, are putting together a package, working with people, civilians within the Politburo of the CCP to try to remove Xi Jinping, the president. And I spoke earlier about this as well, that in China, they had some kind of arrangement, I think from the later days of Deng Xiaoping or even after Deng Xiaoping, that you have these term limits where the president and every person that have been in the CCP will serve a particular term based on the age limit, and which I think the capped age limit is at 70 or something like that. And then you have Hu Jintao coming and doing exactly the same thing. But after Xi Jinping came to power, some of his confidants and some of his friends started making the argument that the reason why Hu Jintao could not follow through some of his policies and program was because he became a political lame duck towards the end of his rule. And because he became a political lame duck, quote unquote, it was difficult for him to follow through some of his policies and programs. Therefore, Xi Jinping don't want to repeat the same cycle of becoming a political lame duck. So like I said, in recent months, senior military leaders have disappeared from public view. Top generals, once seen as untouchable, are now under investigation. And the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, the backbone of Chinese power, is experiencing a leadership vacuum that has stunned analysts around the world. And this is very dangerous because Xi Jinping himself is not a military guy. If they say that what is going on right now is investigation or it's a purge, and the people don't know about it, it could also backfire because most of the elites within the system, and you need to understand that most of these guys are children of what they call the princeling. Princeling meaning those that their parents, participated with Mao Zedong in the revolution, I think in 1949. So he is also a princeling. So it's Xi Jinping. So the idea that one princeling is now purging another princeling and removing him from power at this point in time where we are seeing chaos around the world with the tariff war launched by the United States of America on countries like China and countries around the world. It's why a lot of analysts are asking questions and trying to understand what is really going on. So at the center of all of this is Xi Jinping, the president of China. Once described as having absolute control of China's military, Xi is now presiding over a system marked by purges, loyalty tests, and growing instability at the very top. So we are talking about the very top of Chinese politics. So we are not talking about some, feeder, rank and file. And this purge is not just happening within the military establishment, it's also happening within the, it's happening within the intelligence apparatus of the state. And this is a big, giant problem for the president himself and for a lot of reasons at this point. We had the whole story in 2020, in 2016 or 2018 about the rocket force, corruption within the system. And now the Chinese leadership is accusing Zhang Youxia and other military generals of colluding with the United States of America and colluding with the American intelligence. This is where it gets really, really, really messy. So they're accusing them of colluding with US intelligence. They're accusing them of leaking Chinese nuclear secrets with the United States of America. That the Americans know about this because the top generals at the very top are in cahoots with the CIA, that they are working with the Americans and they are preventing China from reaching the very top. And there is corruption within the system. So this is one thing we need to understand. And why the political leadership in China is afraid is for one reason. They saw what happened in the Soviet Union. And they saw that the top leadership of the Soviet was compromised, with the what's his name, the last president of the Soviet Union, or the last leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, introducing the policies of glasnost and perestroika, which were the economic and political policies that were implemented by Gorbachev that led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So one of the major fears in China today is that Xi Jinping was alive when this happened. The top political leaders and military leaders were alive when this happened, and they are suspecting that America is trying to bring down China from within. And again, the alternative to that is to launch a war against Taiwan, which will unite the country, but turn the rest of Asia Pacific against them. And is China willing at this point in time to make that sacrifice? Is China ready at this point in time to say, look, we want all this nonsense to come to an end? What are we going to do? We want all of this to come to an end. Is China willing to do that at this point in time? Are they willing to make the sacrifice? That is also the $10 million question. So this is the conversation, that I intend to have with you today. If you're watching from anywhere around the world, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Savak Media Network, SAVVARK Media Network. You can see me across all platforms. So today we are talking about the rise and fall of Zhang Youxia, that was once touted as one of the most important figures in China, the confidant, the loyalist of the Chinese President Xi Jinping. I think it's the 6th top leader that have been purged, among those that were promoted during the third term of the convention that brought about the third term of the Chinese leader Xi Jinping. So what is really going on in China? Is this simply another anti-corruption campaign, or is China entering a dangerous phase of political over-centralization, where loyalty matters more than competence? Is it about loyalty, or is it about competence? And yes, when you run a country like China, your eyes have to stay open. If not, you lose your seat in a second, because there are so many forces pitted against one leader. There was even a point in time that they say Xi Jinping barely have an hour of sleep. No, you can't sleep. And this has been going on since 2013, because there's a lot of work to do. There's internal problems. Everybody's cooking. You're always watching over your shoulder, because anything goes wrong, it's an issue. Okay? And another point again, and this is why China cannot have political vacuum, because there was even an analyst that talked about, that there's so many billionaires in China, and that if the government falls, for instance, that most of these guys are willing to quickly move out their assets out of the country, because as it is now, most of them can't move anything out of the country without permission from the very top. And if it happens, even if it is in 20 hours or 18 hours, the top leadership will block it. So imagine a power vacuum in China for 15 days, and this amount of resources that can leave the country, and the amount of top billionaires in the country at this point that are afraid of the political leadership in China that can liquidate the Chinese economy. So this is part of what I intend for us to discuss today. Another aspect of it is that, and what does this mean for Taiwan, the United States of America, China's relations with Africa and the rest of the world? So this is not just about China and the politics and whatever is going on in China. It goes beyond that. It's also how this impacts, other countries around the world, including Africa. So this is the conversation that I intend for us to have today. So welcome to this section, ladies and gentlemen. Don't forget to like, don't forget to share. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to my channel. In order to understand what is really happening, we have to understand how China itself is governed. China is run by its government, and it's run by the Chinese Communist Party. Like I said, the Chinese government is the Communist Party, the CCP. So the Communist the Communist Party of China, or the CCP as they call it. Now, above the states, above the military, above the court, sits the parties at the very top. So you have the party itself, you have the state, the party, you have the military, and you have other establishments, in that order. Some people will argue that you can also put the party above the state in any sense. So the party and the state, that the party cannot exist without the state or the structures of the state today, and vice versa. So the Central Military Commission as well, which is the CMC, which is the topic of conversation today, was led until recently by General Zhang Youxia. Now the CMC, which is the Central Military Commission, controls the People's Liberation Army, the PLA. So it's important for us to understand the background to this. And I'll try to take it slowly so that you guys can understand. So for those of you watching on any platform, there are key important things we must understand about the structure of the Chinese political system. So you have the CCP, which is the Chinese Communist Party, which is the life wire. It runs the day-to-day activities of the state. You have the Chinese state, you have the CCP, and you have other organs of the state. And some analysts will even put the CCP on par with the state itself. That is, a Chinese Communist Party owes its existence to the state, and the state owes its existence to the Chinese Communist Party because of the revolution that happened in 1949, and it has been the same since then. So they put them on par. So for the purpose of logic and understanding, we say the state, we say the Chinese Communist Party, and we put other organs, including the CMC, which is the Central Military, which is the CMC, sorry, which is the Central Military Commission, which then the PLA, which is now ruled, which is governed by the CMC. Now you need to understand the CMC is at the political level, then the PLA is military, but the people running the CMC are military guys. So you need to understand, and the people that run the CMC are answerable directly to the Chinese Communist Party, which is led by Xi Jinping. Now, like I said, the Central Military Commission controls the People's Liberation Army, which is the PLA, not the Ministry of Defense, not the Parliament, not the President, at least not officially, but the President is the head of this of the CCP. Now, the CMC, which is the Central Military Commission, was led until recently by Zhang Youxia. So I want you guys to understand the structures, and the political structures and how this is organized in China. Now, the PLA does not swear loyalty to China as a nation. It swears loyalty to the party. And this is where it gets interesting. So the PLA, which is the People's Liberation Army, swears direct allegiance not to the state, but to the Chinese Communist Party. And the Chinese Communist Party governs over the CMC, which is the Central Military Commission, led recently by Zhang Youxia, who have now been purged, who have now been removed. For us to continue this conversation, I want to give you guys a quick recap again. If you're just joining, you're welcome. Today, we are talking about what is going on in China with the purging of this guy, General Zhang Youxia. Who is Zhang Youxia? This is what we want to discuss today. Don't forget to like, share, and comment. And if you have any questions, you can leave it in the comment section. If you want to have any conversations about this, leave your questions in the comment section. I'll respond to them accordingly. So the conversation today, and I'll give you guys a quick recap, of our conversation today, is that while the world is focusing on Iran and American deployment in Nigeria and what is going on in Venezuela, there's an internal struggle going on in China. There's an internal struggle going on in China. And for those of you that have been following my page for a while now, I've been talking about this, that there's an internal struggle going on in China, and that if Xi Jinping is not careful, he'll be purged. He'll be removed himself. So what we have seen over the past week is a military coup within the system. Okay? Because the Chinese president, Xi Jinping himself, is not a military guy. This is his closest confidant. In fact, over the past 2 or 3 years, after his third term, the elongation of tenure or the removal of term limits, Xi Jinping have grown, incessantly with paranoia. He's afraid of, what is going on around him. And he has removed some of the top military guys that he himself nominated to occupy very special position, whether within the CMC or within the CCP. So this has happened over the past 2 years. So the topic of our conversation today is Youxia, who is this China's strongman who have been purged and removed. So this is the conversation. And like I said, that while the world is focusing on everything that is happening in Venezuela, in Nigeria, in Iran, Israel, Palestine, there's an internal struggle going on in China, which will define China, because China is one of the most important countries in the world today. The Chinese economy, by far, some will argue, by purchasing power, is the largest. And the US is afraid of what China might do, because when you have the economy as a base, every other thing becomes a superstructure. So this is why it is important for us to also focus and try to understand what is going on in the Pacific and in Asia. So the United States of America recently have also been targeting China with sanctions, with punitive measures, with tariffs, and China has been fighting back. In fact, if there's anything that brought out Xi Jinping from the doldrum, it's America's foreign policy towards China. Unify the country again, because America have imposed all these sanctions and tariffs on China, and that have now given more power to Xi Jinping. So it seems like America's foreign policy, particularly under Trump, have anything but emboldened Xi Jinping and brought him from the doldrum, because the Central Military Commission, working with some elements within the CCP, were ganging up on Xi Jinping, according to reports coming out of China, and that the former Premier Wen Jiabao and some of his people were working with elements within the CCP in an attempt to remove Xi Jinping, because most of them were not happy with him for this tenure elongation, because there's an arrangement. Even within the mafia world, you have arrangements, you have unspoken rules, and so on and so forth. So Xi Jinping is believed to have gone outside the code. He's believed to have violated some of those codes and ethics of conduct. And this is why there's a lot of disdain, there's a lot of resentment within the Chinese Communist Party and within the Central Military Commission, which is the CMC. So this is what I want us to understand today, and the conversation I want us to have today in relation to what is going on in China. So, like I said, the history goes back, a bit, with the issue about corruption related to Zhang Youxia as well. Zhang Youxia, let's not forget, this was an appointment. This was almost an appointment by Xi Jinping. This was his closest confidant. He trusted this guy. So it's more about loyalty at this point. And if you step out of line, because the game is very dangerous, there's no real institutional model that can oversee the transition of power. So Xi Jinping has not designated somebody to take over power from him. He has removed term limits. And the argument made by Xi Jinping's loyalists in removing term limits is that if you keep the term limits, it's going to make the president a lame duck. And they made the argument that during the last days of Hu Jintao, who was the last president before Xi Jinping, that he could not implement some of his policies and programs because, in essence, he became a political lame duck. And that even the Premier Wen Jiabao got so powerful at some point because, of the fact that, the president had become a lame duck, and Wen Jiabao have amassed enough power and have enough delegate support within his rank in order to shape the outcome of what would happen. So Xi Jinping came out of the process. And who brought Xi Jinping to the fore? It was Hu Jintao. It was Hu Jintao's camp, that was even in struggle with Wen Jiabao. So Chinese politics is very, very, very dirty. So I'm going to walk you guys through what is going on step by step. And like I said, if you have a question, you can leave it in the comment section. And this is one of the most powerful guys within Chinese politics, and he has now been purged, General Zhang Youxia. As the world is focusing on what is happening in Venezuela and the American intervention in Nigeria and Iran, the internal struggle going on in China is happening right now, and it is very important for us to take a look at it. So in recent months, senior military leaders have disappeared from public view. Top generals once seen as untouchable are now under investigation, and the People's Liberation Army, which is the backbone of the Chinese political power, is experiencing leadership vacuum. As we speak right now, who is the real leader of the CMC, which is like I said, you have the Chinese state, you have the Central Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, and then you have the CMC. Now, the PLA, which is under the CMC, which is the People's Liberation Army, does not even swear allegiance to the Chinese state. It swears allegiance to the Central the Chinese Communist Party, which is the CCP. Now, the head of the military, which is General Zhang Youxia, who leads the Central Military Commission, the CMC, has now disappeared with other generals. What is really going on? So last year, I'll give you a breakdown. Last year, there were arguments that the Chinese president Xi Jinping was having health issues. Some said he had cancer. Some said he had, he had stroke, and he was not seen in public view. In fact, the BRICS summit that was held in Brazil was not able to attend. He was not able to go to South Africa for some meeting and so on and so forth, to the extent where I think the Russian president Vladimir Putin sent the Belarusian president Alexander Lukashenko to see him in China, because the argument made in America and made in Russia is that the military high command and some figures within the CCP have put him under house arrest. This was the argument they had at that time, that he has been put under house arrest, which could not be substantiated. So what has happened after that time is that Xi Jinping have now come out of the doldrum. He's now becoming popular again within the ranks of the people within the PLA, within the CMC, and within the top echelon, which is the Chinese Communist Party, which is the CCP, or the Politburo. And some of them have now given him support to purge those that he saw as dissidents and that have become increasingly unloyal to him. So this is the conversation I want us to have. Now, at the center of all of this, like I said, is Xi Jinping. But I explained the structure of the Chinese system to you. I'll do it one more time. Why is this relevant? A conversation, because whatever happens in China will have a devastating effect, a cascading effect on the rest of the world. China today is one of the most important, if not the most important country in terms of economy. Most of the things we use today, electronics, manufacturing, everything happens in China. China is the manufacturing Mecca or Jerusalem of the world. So, and the impact of China failing on Africa will be devastating. It will be nuclear. So it is important for us to also understand what is going on there. And like I said, for you to understand China, which is what most of the people in the West don't care about. It's the same thing in Africa. Not a lot of people tend to look at what is happening within the Chinese system because of different reasons. Okay, but you need to understand how the Chinese model and the system functions to be able to connect that with the economic model and their connections to countries like Africa, where I'm from. So this is very important. And for those of you that do geopolitics and you look at what is happening in Israel, Palestine, what is happening in Iran and Venezuela, a lot of people are talking about that, but they do not even know the Chinese struggle and what is happening within China. To the extent where the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, and his people are accusing the top generals of spying for the Americans, of leaking nuclear information to the Americans about Chinese nuclear program, and leaking top information about China's preparation for the invasion of Taiwan. And we saw that again with what happened with the rocket force, about 5 or 6 years ago or thereabout. That there's enormous corruption within the system. So this is the conversation that must be had to try to understand what is going on. Now, like I said, the People's Liberation Army is the backbone of Chinese political power. But this is what is happening in China has not happened since the 80s or 70s, according to reports. And this is happening quietly, with the rest of the world focusing their camera on Venezuela and focusing their camera on Iran, or looking at what the Americans are trying to do in Nigeria. So, and this is happening quietly. And if this doesn't go well, we don't want to see a world where China goes into a state of civil war. Because even though everything looks smooth and sailing from the outside and everything is all organized, we have seen this before. There was revolution in 49, and subsequently there was, after 45, there was a massive civil war that led to, what they call it, the Great Leap Forward or something like that. That was led by Mao Zedong, which eventually led to some of the the Kuomintang fleeing China and going to the island of Taiwan and setting up a government in Taipei. And this is what have led to the, this creating an alternative structure or government in parallel to the government in Beijing today. So when people talk about China, you have to look at the model for what it is. China have 22 provinces. In fact, China is arguing that they have 23 provinces, including Taiwan. They believe that Taiwan is part and parcel of China. And the Chinese political model, they have 22 provinces practically. And then you have special administrated areas like Hong Kong and Macau. Hong Kong was under British rule for 154 years, while Macau was under Portuguese rule for over 200 years. Both of them handed over in 1997, January 1997, and the other one, I think, around 1999. And you also have other autonomous areas like, not Inner Mongolia, Tibetan Autonomous Region. So China this is the structure of Chinese political system, and the Chinese, they are very proud of their history. Okay, they're proud of their history. They're proud of their civilization, going back to the Ming Dynasty, to the Yuan Dynasty, and we can take all day to talk about that. But I want us to focus on what is really going on politically in China today, how that affects Asia Pacific, and how it affects the rest of the world. Countries like Vietnam, countries like Australia, countries like what do you call it? Vietnam. What's the name? This where you have Manila, Philippines, are teaming up with the United States. Vietnam to a lesser extent, but now we are seeing the current government in Vietnam is saying, well, I'm not interested in really antagonizing China. Our biggest trade partner is China. And the funny thing is that all these countries that are sort of ganging up against China in the area, their biggest trading partner is China. So the economic integration that have happened over the past 10 to 15 years is crazy. To the extent where China is now being given more legitimacy because they can clearly see what the United States of America is doing to their own allies. You have the Prime Minister of Canada going now to Beijing. You have the Prime Minister of the UK going to Beijing. And very soon we might have the German Chancellor heading to Beijing. Even though the rhetoric at home is that, we don't like this Chinese Communist Party, they are not democratic, they are this and that, these guys are bullies, we don't like what they are doing to the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, and so on and so forth. But they are going there and doing business with them because this is the right thing to do. Because America cannot offer you anything. America is imposing tariff on you. What else are you left with? You want to get EV cars for 1/4 or 1/5 of the price that the Americans are giving to you in Canada, you go to China. Mexico cannot afford to buy, for instance, EV cars from America. It's easier to buy it from China. And the US is trying to force everybody around them to get this. But this, again, I want to go back to the conversation about why whatever political dynamics is happening in China today is very important for us to focus on, to take a look at, because if China crumbles and devolve into civil war, it will have an impact on the rest of the world, because China supplies almost everything that the world needs at this point. Like I said, at the center of this is the Chinese President Xi Jinping, once described as having absolute control over China's military. Xi Jinping have now, been faced by this, enormous pressure coming from the outside. So this is it's very important for us to have conversation. It's very important for us to have this conversation and see what is really going on. So this is simply another, it's not just an anti-corruption campaign like they're claiming. It's not just an anti-corruption campaign, because what the CCP is claiming, or what people in the CCP are claiming, is that this is an anti-corruption campaign. But I think that China is entering a dangerous phase of political over-centralization where loyalty matters more than competence. At this point in time, it's about loyalty. And rightfully so, because if the power at the center cannot trust the people working around it, then it becomes a problem. And the sort of accusation we are hearing about leaking information about Chinese nuclear program to the Americans, this is the sort of thing we saw with the Soviet Union that led to the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the policies of glasnost and perestroika, introduced at that time by the Mikhail Gorbachev, who eventually became the last leader of the Soviet Union, brought us to this stage. So this is an important conversation that must be had. Like I said, and what does this mean for Taiwan? and the United States, Africa, and the rest of the world. Today, I'm going to break all of this down in the next 20 to 25 minutes so that we can understand the impact of what is going on today in China on the rest of the world. To understand what is happening now, we need to understand how China is actually governed. Like I talked about it before, China is not run in the way and manner the American model is, or the American political system is run. Now you have, like I said, you have the Chinese Communist Party, which sits at the very top, which is the CCP. Then you have the state. Why most people make that kind of argument is because you have the PLA, which is the People's Liberation Army, which is the backbone of the state, pledging allegiance to the Communist Party because they believe that the Communist Party of China is what gave birth to China and not otherwise. And you have a lot of people in China that are not really comfortable with that, but most of them can't speak about it. The Chinese system is really difficult to understand, so they place a lot of prominence on the Communist Party of China. Now, at the very top, I said, is the institution, which is the party that matters more than any other thing. And then you have the Central Military Commission, the CMC. Now, the leader of the CMC have to have allegiance to the party, owes his allegiance to the party, and swears allegiance to the party, because the leader of the CMC or the CMC leadership is more or less of a political appointment by military, appointed by political appointment of military guys to fill up that position. So they are military guys, but they serve political purposes, and they are answerable directly to the CCP and the leadership of the CCP. And at the very top of the CCP, you have Xi Jinping, who's the president, you have the vice president, you have the premier, the vice premier, and so on and so forth. So the CMC controls the People's Liberation Army, like I said earlier. So the Chinese Communist Party controls the People's Liberation Army, or the PLA. The PLA does not swear loyalty to China as a nation. It swears direct allegiance and loyalty to the party, and specifically to the chairman of the CMC. Right now, the chairman is Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping have now taken over that position. It's crazy that, this guy have a lot of work to do. And people are even arguing that since 2013, this guy has barely had no sleep. Hence, that people are saying, you see, his health is failing him, he's getting older. And how long can this continue? So this makes the CMC the ultimate power center in China. The ultimate, if you want to look at practical political power in China, you have to have control of the Central Military Committee or Commission. The leader of the CCP is a political leader, but you have to have control of the Central Military Commission, which was led until recently by this guy, Youxia. And because the leadership of the CCP believed that Youxia and his people are no longer loyal to the center, this is why we are seeing this sort of backlash today, where they are talking about corruption. So historically, Chinese leader who lost control of the military did not remain leaders for long. So this is a miracle. And the argument is that Xi Jinping lost control of the CMC, and now he survived. So this is now the final showdown for Xi Jinping to reassert himself. And this is happening because of the tenure elongation, because in most cases, most of the military guys are more than willing to allow it to play out for a long time, because after 2 terms in office, the president leaves. But that has not been the case with Xi Jinping, who have decided on tenure elongation. So like I said, once you lose control of the military, that's the end. And most of the guys that Xi Jinping have been purging and removing from power over the past 2 to 3 years were people that he directly appointed or nominated. These were people he directly appointed or nominated. So when Xi Jinping took over power in 2012, he inherited a military plagued by corruption. Promotions were bought, weapons contracts were rigged, entire command structure operated like private businesses. A lot of corruption within the system. And he wanted to reform the CMC and the PLA to be a competent fighting force. This was his argument. He said an army that can fight and an army that can win a war. So the Chinese president Xi Jinping, upon taking over power in 2013, made it one of his cardinal points to restructure and rebuild the PLA, the People's Liberation Army of China, to be a competent army, to be an army that can fight and actually win a war. And he has been able to largely do that, but the corruption remains. But the argument people are making today that this is not just about reforms anymore. It's not just about the fight against corruption. It's about paranoia. It's about fear. It's about the lack of loyalty. And what happened during the period of last year where it was rumored that Xi Jinping's health was failing and some were arguing that he had stroke. And this is the outcome of what we are seeing today. So is Zhang Youxia's time over? This guy, as last year, was described as the most powerful guy in China. When Xi Jinping was having health issues, he was busy removing some of the people that Xi Jinping had put within the CMC and within the top ranks of the PLA. So, and if you lose control of the military, like what's happening in China at that point in time, the days of Xi Jinping as president of China would have been numbered. So it is very important for us to understand it from this context. Like I said, when it came to power, promotions were bought, weapons contracts were rigged, entire command structures operated like private businesses, and Xi Jinping launched what he called an anti-corruption campaign, but it was also something else, a political cleansing. Over the years, Xi Jinping removed generals linked to previous leaders. And again, this is breaking the code. Even within the mafia world, you have unwritten rules. You have structures in place. Most of them understand the unwritten rules that you can't do this and you can't do that. So just think about it. Most American presidents, when the new president come in, they don't really try them. Not because they can't do that or put them through rigorous trials and so on and so forth. Not because that cannot be done, but because these are the unwritten rules. Okay? So, but Xi Jinping have gone against all of that. He has been able to assert himself. He has been able to elongate his tenure in office. And like I said, the argument that some of his close confidants made, the argument that some of his people made for the tenure elongation or the removal of term limits is that when Hu Jintao was in power during his second tenure and his last tenure in office, he became a political lame duck. And what does that mean? Being a political lame duck simply means that he could not push through some of his policies and programs because people did not take him as seriously as they took him seriously during the first term because they knew he was on his way out. So he became a political lame duck. So in order to stop the possibility of becoming a political lame duck, the Chinese Communist Party supported Xi Jinping's idea of removing term limits. And people are saying, well, that does not mean he's going to be president for life. He has no intention of becoming president for life. But then there was a need to remove the term limits in order to remove that possibility of him becoming a lame duck. So this is the area I want us to look at today. Now, basically, when Xi Jinping came to power, he talked about officers with independent bases, that they were operating their own independent military bases and they were just acting autonomous. So he wanted to centralize everything and to understand what was going on. And one other area that this purge is going on is within the intelligence sector or within the intelligence department. All of this is going under the radar. It is not getting international attention because of what is going on in the Middle East and in Africa and in Venezuela. While the rest of the world is focused, the biggest thing happening today is the change happening in China. Not the tension between the United States of America and Iran. That could also have an impact on China because what Xi Jinping has been able to do over the past 6 or 7 months, he has used whatever Trump is doing on the international stage to feed back his energy to be able to reassert himself because of the tariff war and the trade war with China. And what happens with countries like China is that when another country is against them, they all unite and put their differences aside. And the fact that Xi Jinping was seen to have come out stronger during that trade or tariff war with Donald Trump, that have given him more impetus and given him more credibility and credence to now go and purge these guys and use it for domestic purposes. So retaining political power is very, very important. So before he came to power, like I said, officers with independent power bases, commanders who controlled key regions of forces, and in their place, he promoted men known for one thing above else, loyalty. If you're loyal to Xi Jinping, everything comes in place. So this strategy have worked at the beginning, but one thing with people, when you promote them to that office and they become more powerful, and then they believe that they are very important and that without them you can't do anything, and this is what has happened. In fact, the argument made right now is that this general have overseen a structure where information has been leaked constantly to the Americans, and that people within the command structure of the PLA and the CMC were leaking information to the Americans. And is that enough? How long can this continue? This is the argument. So this is part of the conversation we need to have, because China is a very important country. So when people make the argument, why didn't China go to Venezuela to help Venezuela? Why didn't China not go to, why is it not going to Iran? The Chinese have their own model, they have their own system. But at the end of the day, this is what we have been faced with today. She consolidated more power thoroughly than Chinese leader since Mao Zedong, meaning that after Mao Zedong, who led the revolution, that sort of tried to unify the country, although we saw what happened with Kuomintang that fled and set up an alternative government in Taiwan. They say that Xi Jinping now is the most powerful guy in Chinese history, modern history, outside Mao Zedong. But of course, there's a cost to power consolidation and this tenure elongation. Something is not really right with the Chinese system. Something is not quite right with the model, and they are trying to figure it out. And Xi Jinping himself is trying to understand what is really going on that is affecting his power base. So basically, in an attempt to keep this loyalist, it is affecting him. So there's an attempt now to reevaluate what is going on and replace loyalty with professionalism. And as he's trying to do that, cracks are emerging. Okay, so this is what I want us to, as the base of our conversation today. First, we know who this guy is. This is General Zhang Youxia. He has been removed alongside other military powerful figures in China, and the accusation is corruption. And some are saying in China that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is accusing him personally and other people within the ranks of the Chinese People's Liberation Army and the CMC of sabotage and selling information to the Americans. So the most shocking development came in 2025 and early 2026. Zhang Youxia was not just any general. He was the first vice chairman of the Central Military Commission. The first vice chairman. So basically, the head of the CMC practically is him. But Xi Jinping is the political leader. So he's the number one military guy, quote unquote. But Xi Jinping is not the military guy. So the most important military guy and the first vice chairman of the CMC, which is the Central Military Commission, is Zhang Youxia. Okay, but the number one person is Xi Jinping, and he's supposed to be the number two guy. I want you guys to understand what is going on. This is the second most powerful guy in China in practical terms. The second most powerful guy in China by all measures. He's the second most powerful guy in China. If you look at it, he used to be, he's been removed over the past week or so, but he occupies a position of what do you call it? Of the first vice chairman, meaning the number two guy in the CMC, the Central Military Commission. But in military terms, he is a military guy. Xi Jinping is the political guy. Although the promotion is also political, but these are professionals that have been appointed and promoted within the ranks, during the course of Xi Jinping's first, second, and third tenure. So this guy is his right-hand man. Some of these guys have been spying for him. Some of these guys have been spying on other people within the military command and structure. And all of a sudden, this guy became so powerful that the accusation that the Xi Jinping side is leveling against him is that he's working with some of the adversaries of Xi Jinping that are still in the Politburo, and some of them have been removed and are on the fringes, like the former premier Wen Jiabao. So Wen Jiabao is a very powerful guy. Even in China today, he's still very powerful. And we saw what happened with Hu Jintao. Some of the list that Hu Jintao submitted during in the lead up to the second tenure of Xi Jinping, or the third tenure during his tenure elongation, were not represented. So this is a power struggle within China, and whatever happens there will have a devastating and an adversary effect on the rest of the world, particularly economically and even politically. You can't imagine China going to a civil war, the implosion in China, civil war in China, and imagine what can happen. So it's very important for us to understand that. So who is Zhang Youxia? Like I said, He was the first vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, a Politburo member, meaning the top rank of the CCP, the veteran of China's last real war, and a long-time ally of Xi Jinping. Now, Zhang was considered untouchable until he wasn't. Most people thought he was untouchable. Nothing can happen to him. Suddenly, Zhang disappeared from public events. Then came the announcement he was under investigation for serious violations of discipline and law. This is the jungle, man. It's very difficult. And in CCP language, this code for career-ending charges. Once they say he's under custody for investigation, that's the end. Some of them disappeared or will never be seen in public again, or some of them are even wasted, liquidated. They will never see them again. So this has been the standard practice. It's like like you carry out military coup, and whoever, if you succeed, fine. If you don't, that's the end. And this is the fate that befalls Zhang Youxia today, might be that of death. So who is Liu Zhengli? That's another person again. Soon after, another shock, General Liu Zhengli, who is the chief of the Joint Staff Department, was also removed. So Liu was responsible for joint military drills, war planning, combat readiness. Now, if you look at what is really going on, these have some sort of connections with the preparation to go to war with Taiwan, because these are the two most important guys that will actually prepare China to go to war with Taiwan. One of them is the vice chairman of the CCP, who is the most important and the most powerful military guy in China, and the second most powerful guy in China in practical terms, if not in real terms, is the most powerful guy in China, pushed by the President Xi Jinping. And now you have the guy that is responsible for, you have like the chief of general staff. You have the defense minister in countries like Russia, and you have the chief of general staff. Okay, it's the same thing you have with the Liu Zhengli. So you have the number one military guy and the second most important military guy removed, created a power vacuum, a political military power vacuum in China. So Liu Zhengli, soon after another shock, Liu Zhengli disappeared, who is the chief of the Joint Staff Department, was also removed. Now Liu Zhengli is responsible for joint military operations, war planning, combat readiness. And in other words, if China were to fight a war tomorrow, Liu's office would have been central to it. So if China was to go to war with Taiwan, the two guys that are supposed to plan the war and go to war have been removed. And what does that tell us? He does not believe that these guys are loyal to him enough, and that the Americans are keeping an eye on what is going on in Taiwan, and that he believes that all the billions of dollars that have been spent with the rocket force, with amphibious preparation for some sort of amphibious landing, and all the money that have been invested in preparing for an actual war with Taiwan have been leaked to the Americans, and Xi Jinping have known about this, and they have lost trust for this guy. So even if it wasn't him directly that did it, he's responsible because he's the most powerful military guy in China, and he's the one that is supposed to keep an eye on what is going on. So they blame him directly for it. So including war planning and combat readiness. In other words, if China was to fight the war tomorrow, Liu's office would have been central to it. Now, his removal left a gaping hole in the operational leadership. And most of these guys have a lot of information. They have a lot of access to codes, including China's military and nuclear assets. So these are the guys that have been removed, and that has created a power vacuum. Now, another thing to also understand is officially China says these men are being investigated for corruption. This is the official position. But we know for sure that these guys, she have lost hope in them. It's about loyalty. It's also about the preparation for war with Taiwan, that he has lost hope in them. Remember what happened with the rocket force. This is not the first time we are seeing this happen in China again. Unofficially, far darker claims are circulating. Some international reports allege massive bribery scheme, sabotage of weapons program, even leaks of high sensitive military or nuclear data to the Americans. Yeah, this is why you hear that the US is now trying to put pressure on Afghanistan so that they can give them back the military base in what do you call it? Bagram Air Base, so that they can have a clear vision and sight on what the Chinese are doing. Okay, so this is also very important. So China has not confirmed any of these claims, But here's what matters more than any other detail. Xi Jinping no longer wants anything to do with these generals. And in the system like China's, distrust at the highest level is dangerous. So if you fall out of favor, it's death. It's life and death, because political power at that level is very, very dangerous. Normally, the Central Military Commission have 7 members. Right now, only 2 are publicly active: Xi Jinping and Zhang Shengmin. Now, you guys need to understand, these were people appointed or promoted to the Politburo, to the Central Military Commission, and some of them also hold seats within the Politburo. Okay. Now, 7 of them, only 2 are now active: Xi Jinping himself, who is a political leader, and Zhang Shengmin, a political leader. So the military guys, the experts, the professionals have all been paused and removed. The professionals, the military guys, all of them have been paused and all of them have been removed. It's insane what is going on in China, ladies and gentlemen. So while the rest of the world is focusing on what is going on in Israel, Palestine, on what is going on in Africa, with the president of Nigeria going to Turkey, with the Americans deploying troops on the ground, with what is the preparation to go to war with Iran, and a host of a myriad of other political activities going on around the world, including a build-up to conflict between the United States of America and Iran, something is going on in China, ladies and gentlemen. The top Politburo is cracking. The system is cracking. And if this happens, it will have a devastating effect on the rest of the world. Remember that China is now the most important country in the world. Maybe some will say slightly put behind the United States of America at number 2. But economically, you can argue that China is the most important country on earth. Civil war in China, what that can do to the rest of the world, how that can have a cascading impact or like a domino effect on other parts of the world. Conflicts springing up in Central Africa, conflicts springing up in East Africa, conflicts springing up across because of the economic impact, the political impact, and the fallout of this. And how that can even affect the Russian war with Ukraine. And if that pushes Russia to a point where they have to use nuclear weapon. And how that can also impact what is going on in Iran today. A lot of people have been asking questions about why is China not helping Venezuela? The Americans went in there and we have discussed this extensively. China right now does not have what it takes. China is trying to get to that level, but they don't have the expeditionary ability to do so. And I've given you, the structure of the Chinese system. For those of you that are just joining, today we are talking about Zhang Youxia, who is this Chinese strongman that have been pushed by the Chinese Communist Party and by Xi Jinping. And like I said, while the rest of the world is focusing on what is happening in Iran and Venezuela, something is going on in China. In recent months, senior military leaders have disappeared from public view. Initially, like, oh, this is some regular, whatever. But we found out, and the Chinese government have now admitted that these guys are undergoing investigation. 2 of them, 2 most important military guys in China, have disappeared. The head of the most important guy within the CMC, which is the Central Military Commission, led by the president himself, Xi Jinping. So the first vice chairman of the CMC is General Zhang Youxia. He has disappeared. And remember that the CMC is in charge of the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, that swears direct allegiance to the CCP. So we are talking about the most important aspect of the state structure in China. Very important. So 2 of the most important guys have disappeared. And who are these generals? Zhang Youxia is one of them. And who is the second guy? Liu Zhengli. Zhang Youxia and Liu Zhengli. Now, Liu Zhengli, like I said, soon after reports emerged that Zhang Youxia have disappeared, people said, oh, where's the head of the Joint Staff Department? Like, think about it, like you have in Russia, the Chief of General Staff, okay? The Chief of General Staff is the real military guy, not the Chief of Defense. The Chief of Defense Staff in Russia, in most cases, are political appointments. In fact, the last one that was removed was not even a military guy. It was I think, economist or an agriculturalist or something like that. But most of them are appointed to that position because of loyalty to the leader. So the chief of general staff, General Gerasimov in Russia, is the most important guy, is the most powerful guy, the most important military guy that designs strategies, that, lay the plans for war and so on and so forth. So that is the position of Liu Zhengli. So while we're talking about Zhang Youxia, who is the first vice chairman of the CCP, of the CMC, which is the Central Military Commission, and the most important military guy in China, you have Liu Zhengli, who is in charge of, and I'll outline his portfolio in a second. He's the chief of Joint Staff Department. It's called the Joint Chief of Staff, or whatever you call it, in America, but chief of the Joint Staff Department is Liu Zhengli. Now, what are his responsibilities? Liu Zhengli is responsible for joint military operations within the different departments, whether it's the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. He's the number one guy that links all the 3 or 4 departments or 5 departments within the military structure. The Navy, the Air Force, the Army, the intelligence is the most important guy. Liu Zhengli